Imagine standing on top of a giant rock in the desert. On three sides, cliffs drop nearly straight down. On the fourth, a narrow ridge of stone leads to the only path up. Around you, the Dead Sea glows in the distance, and the Judean desert stretches away in every direction. This is Masada, and almost 2,000 years ago, it was the stage for one of the most dramatic last stands in history. In this video, we're going to explore the siege at Masada, why Jewish rebels chose this isolated fortress, how the Roman Empire tried to crush them, and why the story of Masada still resonates today. No gore, no sensationalism, just a gripping human story about faith, power, and the terrible choices people make when they feel there's no way out. To understand Masada, we have to start with the relationship between Rome and Judea. By the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire controlled huge stretches of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Judea, the homeland of the Jewish people, was one of Rome's provinces. For Rome, Judea was a small but strategic region. For the Jewish people, it was much more. It was their promised land, the home of the Temple in Jerusalem, and the center of their religious and cultural identity. Tension between Roman rulers and the local population had been building for years. There were several big flashpoints. Heavy taxation by Roman authorities and their local allies, insensitivity and disrespect toward Jewish religious practices, and a growing sense among many Jews that foreign rule over their holy city was intolerable. Out of this tension came different responses. Some tried to cooperate with Rome to keep the peace. Others preached patience and faith. And then there were the rebels, especially a group often called the Zealots, who believed that violent resistance was the only answer. In 66 AD, that pressure finally exploded into open conflict. This was the beginning of what we now call the First Jewish-Roman War. The Great Jewish Revolt was, at first, surprisingly successful for the rebels. They managed to defeat Roman forces in several early engagements. For a brief moment, it looked as if Judea might actually break free. Rome, of course, could not accept that. The Roman response was massive. Legions marched into the region under the command of powerful generals, including Vespasian, who would later become emperor, and his son Titus. By the year 70 AD, the Romans had besieged Jerusalem itself. The siege was brutal. Food ran short, factions fought each other inside the city, and finally the Romans broke through the defences. They destroyed much of Jerusalem and burned the Second Temple, the heart of Jewish religious life. The city fell. The revolt, for the most part, was crushed, but not everywhere. Some pockets of resistance refused to surrender. Scattered across the desert and hills, a few strongholds remained. And one of the most famous of these was a fortress on a high plateau near the Dead Sea, Masada. Long before the revolt, Masada had already been fortified. In the 1st century BC, Herod the Great, the Roman-backed king of Judea, transformed Masada into a nearly impregnable desert stronghold. He was known for grand and sometimes paranoid building projects, and Masada was one of his most ambitious. On top of this steep plateau, Herod built thick defensive walls with towers, palaces with multiple levels carved into the rock, storage rooms that could hold enormous amounts of food, and crucially, a brilliant system of cisterns and channels to store water brought in from rare desert rains. From above, Masada looks like a giant flat-topped rock, about 400 meters, or roughly 1,300 feet, above the surrounding desert. Climbing it, especially in armor, would be exhausting and dangerous. After Jerusalem's fall, a group of Jewish rebels, often referred to as the Sicarii, a particularly radical faction, made Masada their refuge. Their leader was a man named Eleazar ben Yair. Under his command, around 90-60 people, men, women and children, settled on the plateau. Their goal was simple but incredibly bold: continue to live in freedom, even after the Roman victory everywhere else. For a few years they succeeded. From this fortress, they raided nearby Roman-controlled settlements, gathered supplies, and remained a constant reminder that Rome had not completely won. Eventually, Rome decided that had to change. Around 73 or 74 AD, the Roman governor of the region sent a force to deal with Masada once and for all. The main unit assigned to this task was the 10th Legion, known as Legio Ex Fretensis, along with auxiliary troops and support units. In total, we're likely talking about several thousand Roman soldiers and workers. When they arrived, they faced a huge problem. Masada's defenders were perched on top of a sheer, isolated cliff with a fortress built for long-term survival. The rebels had food, they had water, they had high walls. The Romans had discipline, engineering skills, and time, but no easy way up. So what do you do if you're a Roman commander facing a fortress on top of a natural mountain? You do what Rome did best. You build. If you visit Masada today, you can still see clear evidence of what the Romans did next. First, they built a ring of camps around the base of the plateau. These camps housed soldiers, workers, and supplies. From above, it must have looked like Masada was surrounded by a necklace of Roman squares. Then they built a circumvallation wall, a low wall encircling Masada. This wasn't meant to attack. It was meant to contain. The wall and camp served several purposes. They prevented anyone from escaping the fortress, they kept other rebels from breaking in to help, and they allowed the Romans to calmly organize a long-term siege. But the Romans knew they couldn't just sit and wait forever. The people on top had food and water stores. Masada could, in theory, hold out for years. So they made a plan to reach the walls directly. On the western side of Masada, the cliff isn't quite as sheer. There's a natural rocky slope called the White Rock, or Western Spur, that rises partway up. Still very steep, but not vertical. The Romans decided to turn that slope into a massive siege ramp. Using thousands of stones, earth, and timber, and likely forced labor from locally enslaved people or prisoners, they built an enormous artificial incline up the side of the plateau. Day after day, they added more material. Workers pushed earth, carried rocks, and leveled platforms, all under the watch of defenders above. At the top of this ramp, on a specially built platform, they positioned a heavy siege tower equipped with a battering ram and protective walls. Slowly but surely, the Romans were creating a direct highway to the walls of Masada. From the top, the rebels watched this ramp grow closer and closer. So what was happening inside Masada while this ramp was rising? Our main written source for this story is the historian Flavius Josephus, a Jewish commander in the revolt who later wrote about it under Roman patronage. Because of that, some details are debated by scholars, but his account is still the fullest story we have. According to Josephus, the defenders at Masada were not just fighters. They were families. Men, women, children, all living together in the palaces and storehouses built by Herod. They had granaries filled with food, cisterns brimming with water, and time to plan and pray. As the Roman ramp grew, the defenders tried to disrupt it, likely with arrows, stones, and whatever weapons they could muster. But Rome had enough manpower and protection to continue working. Eventually, the siege tower reached the top of the ramp. The Romans brought the battering ram up against the outer wall. Under the cover of heavy shields and the tower, they began to smash away at the defences. The rebels responded by building an inner wall made of wooden beams and earth, which absorbed the blows better than stone alone. This slowed the Romans, but not for long. The Romans then set fire to that inner wall. The flames took hold. At first, Josephus says, the flames blew back toward the Romans, then the wind shifted and the inner wall burned fiercely. As evening approached, it was clear. The way into the fortress would be open by morning. The Romans pulled back to their camp, ready to storm Masada at sunrise. That night, according to Josephus, Eleazar ben Yair gathered the people of Masada. He delivered a long, passionate speech, arguing that they had taken a stand for freedom, they had refused to bow to Rome, and now, facing certain defeat, they had a terrible choice. If they surrendered, they would be enslaved, separated from their families, and forced to see their wives, husbands, and children under Roman power. Eleazar argued that it was better to die free than to live enslaved. He urged them to choose collective death rather than capture. According to Josephus, the people agreed. The plan he describes is chilling, but I'll keep the description respectful and non-graphic. The men of Masada are said to have taken the lives of their own families first, so they would not fall into slavery. Then, they selected 10 men by casting lots, who were tasked with ending the lives of the remaining fighters. Finally, those 10 drew lots again, and one man was chosen to end the lives of the other 9, and then his own. When the Romans climbed the ramp and broke into Masada the next morning, they expected a fierce final fight. Instead, they found silence. They discovered bodies, burned storehouses, and again, according to Josephus, only a handful of survivors. A few women and children who had hidden in a cistern and later told the story. The Romans had taken Masada, but there was no triumphal last victory. There was only a quiet, unsettling end. So what exactly happened that night? It's important to be honest. Our main account of this tragedy comes from one writer, Josephus, who wrote decades later under Roman supervision, and who had his own reasons for telling the story the way he did. Modern historians debate how literally we should take his numbers, whether all the details are accurate, and how much was shaped into a dramatic moral story. Archaeology at Masada has found remains of the Roman camps and ramp, structures from Herod's time, storage areas, cisterns, and evidence of a long occupation, and some human remains, but not enough to perfectly match Josephus's numbers. So we know a siege truly happened. We know Romans built the ramp and broke in. We know rebels died there. But the exact sequence and scale of the final night's events remain at least partly uncertain. Despite that, the story of Masada has taken on enormous symbolic power, especially in modern times. In the 20th century, the story of Masada became a powerful symbol for many in the modern state of Israel and beyond. Masada has been viewed as a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds, a story of people refusing to surrender their freedom and identity, and a warning about the high cost of uncompromising conflict. For some, the phrase, "Masada shall not fall again," became a sort of motto, an expression of determination that the Jewish people would never again be left defenseless. At the same time, others see the story as more complicated. They question whether the tragic event, if it happened as described, should be viewed as heroic or as a tragic example of how war and extremism can trap people into impossible choices. Today, Masada is a major archaeological site and tourist destination. People hike or take a cable car to the top. They see the ruins of Herod's palaces, the Roman siege ramp still carved into the western side, and the breathtaking view over the desert and the Dead Sea. Standing there, it's hard not to imagine what it felt like to be on that plateau nearly 2,000 years ago, watching the Roman ramp creep closer each day. So what does Masada teach us? At one level, it's a story about military engineering, strategy, and the raw power of the Roman Empire. At another level, it's a deeply human story, about people caught between empire and rebellion, about faith and fear, and about what individuals will do when they believe their freedom, their families, and their identity are on the line. Whether we see the defenders of Masada as heroes, victims, fanatics, or something in between, their story still speaks to us today. It reminds us that history isn't just dates and battles. It's people, real people, standing on a lonely rock in the desert, facing choices we can barely imagine. If you'd like a follow-up video, we can dive into the archaeology of Masada, the debate among modern historians, or a comparison between Masada and other famous last stands. Thanks for watching. And if you found this story interesting, consider subscribing for more deep dives into moments where history and human drama collide.